South, the Pinewood High School Incident. Chapter 10. The night air chilled her bones as she paced down the two-lane street leading away from her home. She was on a mission to get to the main road and meet with her rideshare, the effort being done without the knowledge of her mother or brother. As she passed house after Forrest Layton house, she wondered what kind of life the inhabitants lived, lamenting on how damaged her life was in comparison to the perceived serenity of theirs. From her conversations with Dr. Randall, she gathered that such thoughts were unstable and often led to downward spirals. But after all that had happened to her recently, she found herself not caring what she thought, especially because of the quieted demon. The one good thing that came from her long walk was the memories of cascading through the woods as a child, a carefree journey past tall trees and soft earth. She loved the smell of the seasons reflected in that place most of all, the denotation of autumn by the caramelization of fallen leaves under a cooling sun. It was magical, and hers, a true daughter of the forest, prancing and gathering to her heart's content. That was in the past, however, and as she passed yet another group of homes that were newly developed, her lamentation grew. The times were changing, and the past was a memory, but at least she was given that consolation. It took almost 30 minutes for her to reach the intersection of the main road, her objective being completed as she stood near the elementary school on the corner and waited to be picked up. The world was still at night in Pinewood, mostly because there was nothing to do except go to the 24-hour store she was about to travel to. Sitting alone in the dark made her feel like she were in a different time altogether, away from the pressures of society and given to her own efforts. She knew that she wasn't able to reach such a place anymore. It was taken from her well before she was born, after all. But she liked the idea that there was a way for her to regain control somehow. It didn't take much longer for her to wait, as when she had managed to catch her breath and sit on the nearby curb, a dark-colored SUV pulled up, and her phone gave the familiar confirmation notification. After greeting her driver, Cassidy maintained silence as she was transported further into Pinewood towards the business district. The ride began quietly enough, with her spending the majority of it surfing through posts on Hunter. But the silence was interrupted when the driver decided to probe into her attempt at independence. Late night shopping trip, yeah? The slightly overweight man stretched his short dark hair as he spoke. Yeah, just picking up a few things. Cassidy didn't feel like confiding in the stranger. I get it, the man smiled. My wife loves getting me to go shopping whenever she feels like it. I wonder if it's just a woman thing or something. The attempt at conversation that was aimed at her seemed to fail as Cassidy returned her attention to her phone, the man returning his attention to the road with another awkward rub of his scalp. The ride remained quiet again for a good stint of time until they reached the district. Cassidy got off her phone and looked out of the window to witness the bright streetlights and business signs. With an uncontrolled sigh, she decided to get one last piece of advice from an outside party. Can I ask you something? Cassidy held herself tightly. If you felt as though you were not in control of your life, like everything you wanted was placed outside of your grasp by someone else, what would you do to get back control? Strong question at 1 a.m. The man took his time before answering. If I felt that way, I would first ask myself what there was I was able to control. I believe that there are plenty of things we can change, but the world has a funny way of making us feel like we can't. Yeah, that's what I would say. Find what you can control and focus on using that to grow in whatever way you can use it. Is it really that simple? She looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. What if you don't have anything? What if you're alone and there's nothing for you to hold on to? She could sense her question was weighty, but she didn't know how else to phrase it. It was how she felt after all, like a pit had opened up and swallowed everything she could use to fix her situation. What else was there to use to protect herself when all that she had grown used to was abruptly taken away? Amber was sure to express how much she hated her, and rightly so, but even though she were about to be shunned by her ex-best friend, she had to see it through. She only wished that it didn't feel so painful. In that case, the man said before she could completely forget that she had asked him a question, I'd say that, with a deep breath and the ability to think, anything can be achieved, as long as you don't give up. A moment later, and they were pulling up to the store. Cadmart was a large warehouse that catered to everyone's needs, but there was something that she needed that she wasn't sure it could provide. As she stepped out of the SUV, Cassidy thanked the man before watching him pull off into the night, a part of her wanting to have him take her back home. She turned to face the entrance of the building and, while pulling on her jacket, she walked inside. The brightness of the interior space was overwhelming and made her shield her eyes as they adjusted. The large expanse of products helped to lower her guard as she walked further within, her attention almost being taken away from the real reason she was there. It took another moment of walking past the food section for her phone to ring, and when she answered it, she slowed her walking and spun around to see if she could spot her. Hey, yeah, I'm over by the food, Cassidy said while searching for her. Yeah, of course you are. She smiled at Amber's attempt at humor. Cassidy waited for her accuser by the frozen foods for a moment, and, as if she were prey to the hunt, Amber appeared behind her, startling her with a shove of her shoulder. Cassidy held her hand to her mouth as she gazed at her blonde companion. Her face wasn't as damaged as it was in the photo Detective Harvey showed her. The bruising had gone down, and the color of her skin was restored around her eyes. She was as beautiful as she was before the assault, the only exception being the cut on her nose that, although faint, was still noticeable. Cassidy instinctively reached out to examine her face, but Amber jolted back as she did so, causing her to begin to cry. Amber, she tried to explain herself. I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry I did this. Cass, it wasn't your fault. Amber looked on as Cassidy began to wipe her face with her sleeve. How can you say that, Amber? Her voice was muffled as she spoke through her attempts at clearing her face of tears. It was me. I was the one on top of you. It was my fist that did this to you. I'm so sorry, Amber. I didn't know what happened or why I did it, but I'm sorry. I know, Cassidy. Amber walked up to Cassidy and wrapped her arms around her, the act shocking her more than her best friend's acceptance of what had happened. Cassidy returned the gesture and poured what remained of her love into the one she almost destroyed. After nearly a minute of this, Amber pulled away abruptly and waited for Cassidy to calm herself. Looking on at her, Amber released a smile as she watched Cassidy reduce her sobbing to light sniffles. All of this over a little fight? I wonder what you would do if I died. Amber folded her arms. Don't joke like that, Amber. Cassidy met her stance, and the two looked as though they were facing off against each other for a second time. I called you because I found out something important, Cass. Amber released her reserved stance and grabbed Cassidy by the arm to lead her further into the warehouse. We have to talk about the school. The girls made their way to the far end of the store, near the baby stuff, Cassidy commenting on her desires to be a mother one day, much to Amber's dissatisfaction. When they were nearing the end of the section, they stopped near the cribs to talk further. As she spoke, Cassidy looked at how confident Amber was and felt a sense of severity she hadn't experienced from her before. There was something going on that she felt neither of them were prepared for. It wasn't by accident that we had our fight. Amber confirmed what Cassidy had felt since the incident occurred. I did some digging into our illustrious benefactor and found out some messed up stuff. For starters, do you know what compound I-347 is? Compound what? Cassidy felt herself losing touch. It's an additive in the products we're consuming. Amber looked around the store as if to see if anyone was watching them. It's an agent that the military was experimenting with years ago, before we were born. Cassidy raised her eyebrow at the sudden statement. It wasn't as though she didn't believe Amber, but she wondered what they were really discussing. It wasn't like her best friend to spew conspiracy theories or conservative rhetoric, the sudden sharing of which made her take a second look at the girl before her. Although there was a lot happening at the school with the new meat product and ads everywhere, she felt that it was all par for the course when it came to corporate intervention. She prepared to say something to that effect, but Amber beat her to it. I know how it might sound, but it gets worse. Amber held her ground. Thanks to Kimberly, I was able to dig into some files from the late 80s pertaining to the purchase of Gwendolyn Meats by the Cadwell Corporation. Guess what happened to that company? It was renamed to Southern Cuts. So what? Cassidy was losing patience. Amber, we need to talk about what happened between us. I hurt you, and you want to talk about some business merger? No, Cass. Amber looked more serious than she ever had. This has everything to do with what had happened to us. Gwendolyn Meats was a government testbed for food additives during the Cold War. They were testing long-term preservation solutions in case we were forced underground due to nuclear war. They made their way from the baby aisle towards the shoes, and Amber began to look at some of them as she spoke. Cassidy didn't know what to say or think as she listened to the blonde girl spew the information she gathered. While listening, Cassidy felt as though she were being brought into something she didn't want to be a part of. The dumping of information from the thin girl making her want to stop paying attention. But she continued nonetheless. Kimberly was right. Southern Cuts has been using the school as a test bed for something, Amber said as she refocused on Cassidy. Compound I-347 is a isotope that is used for communication relay from external stimulation. In other words, it's used to communicate information from outside a host body to the inside. But Cassidy felt a chill finger her spine. I mean, okay, it's just information, right? That's no different from anything else pertaining to a doctor's visit, right? It would be if that was all to it. Amber found a nearby bench and sat down. The algae, Cass. Remember what you said about it being bacteria? Gwendolyn Meats had managed to create the isotope to try and control the progression of the bacteria spoiling its product. but the application was a fail. When Cadwell bought the company, however, they managed to find an alternative use for it. Cassidy felt her knees weaken at what she assumed Amber was going to say. The thought had crossed her mind before, but she wanted it to not be real. The products she was comfortable consuming being used to control her actions. As she fell into her thoughts, Cassidy audibly gasped as she remembered everything that had occurred over the last month. The weird sounds from the intercom at school, the coven and the protests, and the Ander demon. With Amber's attention set towards her, Cassidy did what she felt was right and took control of what she could. Amber. Cassidy's concerned expression made Amber return the sentiment. I joined them, the witches. I'm a witch of the Blackroot Coven. It sounded ridiculous coming out of her mouth, but she didn't know how else to say it. She waited for a response without looking at Amber, her thoughts flying to how she would plead for Amber to forgive her and not end their friendship. There was a silence between them a moment as Cassidy assumed Amber had to process the shock of what was said. As she returned her gaze to her best friend, however, she saw that Amber had a grin on her face. Yeah, Cass, I knew. Amber might as well have laughed. It was obvious when you snuck that pamphlet back into your bag that you were interested in Jessica Schumer's offer. What is it like to be a witch? You have the overweight thing going, but your nose isn't big enough. You knew? Cassidy's shock at Amber's attention to detail was greater than everything else she had said up to that point. Amber, I thought you would have hated me for joining. I thought you would hate me for joining. Why would I hate you, Cass? We're best friends, right? Cassidy felt herself beginning to cry again. Amber saw this and got up from her seat to comfort her yet again. The relieved girl taking the extra effort to squeeze her best friend tighter than she had ever done. Than she ever did. Than she ever had. When the moment was over, Cassidy let her go, but still held her hands. The desire to remain linked, filling Cassidy with feelings she didn't want to let go of. They stared at each other again as Cassidy took in the acceptance from her best friend, allowing an unspoken bond to form between them. Amber, I'm so glad that you know now. Cassidy felt like flying. I've learned so much from Mother and the other sisters. We've been through a lot over the last few weeks, but they hadn't abandoned me or made me feel like I was wrong in any way. I found my power with them. I'm a spiritualist, Amber. I can communicate and use spirits to help me accomplish my goals and... Whoa, slow down, Sister Learman. Amber's jest made Cassidy remember how obsessed she was. Maybe we can ease me into the crazy instead of spilling at the first meeting. Sorry, Amber. Cassidy lowered her gaze. I'm just really happy you know now. Right. Amber walked away from her to lead them away from the aisle. Come on, I want to check out the electronics. The girls made their way along the back of the store to where the electronics were and stopped periodically at the computers. Amber lamented at the price on a few models, while Cassidy looked at some game consoles and wished that she had the money to buy one. When they had their fill of window shopping for the moment, Amber continued her spill on what she discovered during their time apart. Cassidy listened intently as they remained in the aisle of the electronics section looking at movies. When we were told that the school was going to be including products from Southern Cuts, we all assumed that it was just the meat that was going to be different. Cassidy, it's in everything. The drinks, chips, vegetables. It might even be in the water. That's insane. Cassidy began to think of every time she put anything in her mouth at school. That would mean that it's too late to avoid it, right? Yeah, but there's more to it. Amber examined a fantasy movie called Tales from Corridell, The Undead Wars. The isotope has a half-life of a few weeks, so give it about a month and it's out of a person's system. What I want to know is what can be done in that time period to someone who is under its influence. Cassidy looked stunned as she reminisced on what she had done over that time. She told Amber about the bonfire and her communication with the Ander demon. She told her about how she was being controlled by it and that she attacked police officers as well, all while explaining how it felt good while it was happening. Amber listened to her in a way that she felt was not judgmental. When she finished her explanation to her best friend, she remembered why she loved her the way that she did. Amber was the only person she could share what was on her mind with and not have her try to fix what was wrong. I see. Amber put the film back and began walking away from the electronics section. Cassidy followed behind her, and the two made their way towards the hardware section, where Amber decided to stop near the tools. She did this frequently when they did their shopping together. The blonde seeming to take a liking to various tools and gadgets Cassidy was okay with ignoring. Before they could continue their conversation, they were met on the aisle by another late-night wanderer. It was a man. His broad shoulders and taller stature made Cassidy feel intimidated a little as he excused himself while moving past them to examine the hammers. Come on, Cass. Amber grabbed her by the arm again and walked her away from the intruder towards the household goods. We have to be careful now. I don't know what might happen to us, but do me a favor and keep a lookout for anyone you might not trust. There's more going on in the lower shores than we know. When they were safe within the confines of the bedding aisle, Amber felt safe enough to let go of Cassidy's arm and began to examine some pillows. Cassidy did the same, but as she checked the firmness of one, her phone rang, the caller being Arthur. Amber must have sensed how Cassidy was feeling and snatched her phone from her to answer. Before Cassidy could stop her, the phone was answered and Arthur's angry voice could be heard piercing the quiet store. Chill out, baby. She's with me right now. Amber's careless use of words was another reason why Cassidy felt safe sharing with her. The bathroom? Ugh. Well, I wouldn't get too mad at her, babe. Remember when you bruised her arm because you couldn't control your liquor? Okay. Don't wait up. She'll be back soon. With that, Amber hung up the phone and gave it back to Cassidy, who was still trying to rationalize in her head how she was going to appease her angered brother. Amber gave Cassidy a wink and went back to checking out a sheet set Cassidy assumed she wanted to buy. She placed the phone back into her pocket and stayed by Amber's side the rest of the way through the section until they reached the kitchen appliances. As Amber went to check out some toasters, Cassidy took a minute to look at her and fantasize about a world where they were living together, doing some late-night shopping for things they knew they needed for their 2-bedroom apartment in the nearby area. I want us to promise each other, okay? Amber pulled her away from her dream. There's a lot going on, like I said. I know I don't like to say it, but I'm scared, Cass. What happened with us might only be the beginning of something we both aren't yet ready to handle. I know that we might have more coming around the corner, but I'd like for us to handle it together from now on, okay? Cassidy looked Amber in the eyes and felt, for the first time, a responsibility to the one that was with her from the beginning. Cassidy held out her hands to see if Amber would trust her enough to meet her the rest of the way. Without hesitation, Amber reached with her hands to meet the larger girl, and the two held each other's hands in solidarity. It wasn't spoken, but Cassidy knew that Amber was on the same page as her. When they released their grip on each other, Amber decided to state an addendum to their contract. Next time, tell me everything up front, okay? Her beautiful eyes dropped whatever resistance Cassidy may have had. Even the stuff with the coven, okay? I might not understand it, but you're my best friend. No. You're my sister now, okay? The joy Cassidy felt built in her chest to the point of it almost being painful, her rounded face casting a smile at the girl she knew she would do anything for. They spent the rest of their trip holding hands as they made their way throughout the store, stopping near the toys to play with foam swords and looking at board games. When they had their fill of the place, they decided to prepare to leave, Cassidy wanting to buy them something sweet, some chocolate chip cookies, before doing so. Amber called them a rideshare to get back home, to which Cassidy decided to ask what she'd been holding back from doing since they became friends. Hey, Amber, how do you always have the money for rideshare? What Ada doesn't know won't hurt her, right? Amber's smug expression made Cassidy smirk slightly. That's wrong. Your mother might get the wrong impression of me if she finds out. She doesn't care about anything I do, Cass. The blonde girl looked into the distance as she checked her phone. Even before Dad died, she was so focused on Kimmy's success that she forgot she bought another kid. Whenever Amber brought up her adoption, Cassidy knew that she was needing to vent about something going on in the house. She was prepared to probe further as they entered the line to buy their things, but Amber's phone beat her to the punch. A text chimed in that took all of her newfound sister's attention away from the conversation. There was a kind of look that she gave after reading it that made Cassidy raise an eyebrow, a quick look of concern that was uncharacteristic of her companion. Is everything okay? Cassidy asked as she began to pay at one of the self-scan registers. Yeah, hold on a minute, okay? Amber began to walk towards the exit of the store. I think the ride is here. Hurry up and pay for the cookies. I'll wave them down. With that, Amber left Cassidy to pay for the food, and she did so rather easily. As she collected her items and walked away from the registers, she thought on what the man had said to her before she entered the store and smiled. It was unlike her to feel so warm, but she loved it. Contrast with the rest of the weekend, she was glad to be getting some concession for the effort. She reached the exit doors and decided to take one last look at the place before leaving to cement the reconciliation. It's going to get better from here on, she affirmed as she focused on leaving. I'm still breathing after all. When she exited the store, Cassidy looked around to find Amber, but didn't see her at first, her gaze finally falling to a white van parked a good distance to her right. As she further focused on the vehicle, she saw who she was looking for, talking with the passenger. She took a step towards the scene and felt a sudden chill, not from the cold night, but from something inside of her. It didn't take much longer for her to realize why she was feeling the way she was, as, before she could take another step, The door to the van flew open, and a familiar frame jumped out. Amber? Cassidy couldn't fully grasp what was playing out before her. When she saw the large man grab Amber, Cassidy felt her heart kick the inside of her chest as the girl who called her sister began to struggle against the attacker. She kicked and screamed into the night as the man flung her wildly towards the gaping maw of the van. She wanted to do something, but her legs felt weak. Before she could give up and collapse, however, another feeling gripped her from the depths. Something she thought she lost. Amber! She roared into the night as she allowed herself to feel the rage she thought was locked up by Elizabeth. Cassidy lunged at the scene of the attempted kidnapping with as much might as she could muster. Feeling the strain against her muscles as she did so, she focused on her breathing while approaching, but she couldn't think of anything else to do, her only goal being to free Amber from the man somehow. She was within a foot of the struggle, and thanks to Amber's continued effort, neither of them were inside of the van yet. Cassidy took the opportunity to take advantage and grab the man by the neck before attempting to tackle him to the ground. "Let go of her!" Cassidy shouted as she continued to fight against the man. "Cassidy, watch out!" Amber tried to say it in time. She heard the impact to her head before feeling it, a sharp pain finally registering after a flash of white briefly blinded her vision. She wanted to continue fighting, but her body couldn't gather any further commands from her brain, the attack from behind being successful in knocking her unconscious briefly. Cassidy rolled around on the ground and tried to regain control of her body as she heard Amber continue to scream. Her best friend was finally given the same treatment from the one that hit her, and she fell deathly silent. "No, Amber!" Cassidy managed to get to her knees as the sliding door slammed shut. "Please, help me. Someone help!" It was no use. The door to the driver's side opened and shut against the growing silence of the night, as Cassidy had finally managed to get to her feet, the world spinning her around in an attempt to keep her from pursuing the kidnappers. She managed to stabilize herself on a nearby traffic guard and did her best to focus on the van that had started its engine up. At the sound of the engine preparing to depart, Cassidy closed her eyes and tried to call on it one last time. "Come on." She tried to talk to it the same way she did at the police precinct. "Come on, demon. I need you." The van began to pull off. Cassidy forced the frigid air around her into her lungs as she dashed towards the van in an attempt to do something for her captured sister. As she drew near to the vehicle, however, she wasn't fast enough as, before she could reach the handle to the sliding door, the van pulled off with screeching tires. She continued to run behind the van as fast as her legs would carry her, but it was all in vain. The van reaching the end of the parking lot and speeding onto the main road. Cassidy fell to her knees and screamed into the night, the horror of witnessing her sister being taken, making her forget her sense of self.